Not here to take what's yours.
Then keep your hand where I can see it.
Denton has been taking government shipments for 3 years.
The Kansas plane had a way of sending things without warning. Nora Hardin had learned that in 9 years of living on the open ground west of Dodge City, storms came without clouds first, frost came without wind first, drought came without a single dry week to announce it, just a gradual tightening of the land, a slow withdrawal of color from the grass, and until one morning you looked out and understood that the country had been making its decision for months and had only now chosen to show you the result. And sometimes in the long red hours before sundown, the road that ran past her gate brought things she had not asked for and could not send back. She was standing at the kitchen window with a flour sack folded against her chest when she saw the rider. He came out of the southwest, where the trail bent around a dry wash and climbed back up through pale grass and scattered rock. The sun was already low, throwing long shadows east across the yard, turning the fence wire orange and the dust around the rider the color of old brick. He moved slowly. The horse beneath him moved slowly. That was the first thing she noticed, not the man himself, but the animal. A black gelding, lean and powerful in better days, now moving with the stiff, measured steps of a creature that had been pushed past its limit and kept going only because it had not been given permission to stop. The man in the saddle had one hand pressed against his left side. Nora set the flour sack on the counter. She did not run. She did not call out. She crossed to the door, lifted the shotgun from its place against the wall beside the frame, and walked out onto the porch with the kind of steadiness that did not come from courage alone. It came from 11 months of doing every hard thing by herself, of learning that the only person who was going to handle whatever came through that gate was the person standing at it. 11 months since Walter Hardin had gone out to check the south fence on a Tuesday morning in January and not come back. 11 months since she had found him in the cold grass near the creek crossing, his hand still wrapped around the reins of a horse that had come home without him, his face turned toward the sky with an expression she had spent too many nights trying to read and finally understood she never would. 11 months of mornings that started with 2 cups of coffee, because her hands remembered what her mind kept trying to forget. She always poured 2. She always put one away before she sat down. She had told herself it was habit, and then told herself it was sentiment, and eventually stopped telling herself anything about it at all. Some habits were harder to break than bones. She stood on the porch and watched the rider come to the gate. He stopped there, outside it, which told her something. A man with bad intentions did not stop at gates. He pushed through them, or he went around them, or he came in the dark when gates did not matter. This man stopped and sat still on his exhausted horse and looked at her with gray eyes that were tired in a way that went deeper than the body. Tired in the way that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. Not in the muscles, but somewhere further in. He lifted one hand slowly, palm open and empty, the other still pressed hard against his ribs. Even from the porch steps, she could see the dark stain spreading through the left side of his faded shirt. Not fresh. Hours old. He had been riding with it. "I mean no harm, ma'am," he said. His voice was rough but controlled, not drunk, not wild, not the voice of a man performing innocence for an audience that he hoped would believe him. It was the voice of a man who had been in pain long enough that pain had become simply the weather he lived inside, something to be noted and then set aside because there was no other option. Nora kept the shotgun pointed at the porch floor. She looked at the horse before she answered. The animal trembled under him, a fine, continuous shiver running along its neck and down through its legs. She had seen horses trembling like that before. It was the trembling of an animal that had given everything it had and was still standing only because loyalty was a stubborn thing that did not always know when to quit. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know. Men who are bleeding at my gate at sundown usually got that way through trouble of their own making." He did not argue with that. "Yes, ma'am, usually. Which kind is yours?" A pause. His jaw tightened slightly, not with anger but with the effort of choosing words that were true without being everything at once. "The kind that followed me here instead of the other way around." Nora studied him for a long moment. The horse trembled. The wind moved through the grass along the fence line with a low, dry sound. Half a mile east, a crow lifted off a fence post and cut sharply north, startled by something on the road she could not see from where she stood. That crow bothered her more than the man at the gate. She looked back at him, at the horse, at the careful way he held himself in the saddle, the way every breath was measured and rationed, the way he had not once let his free hand drift anywhere near the gun belt on his hip. "There's a trough beside the barn," she said. "Water your horse, then come to the back steps." He shook his head once, very slightly. "I asked for the barn, ma'am, not your house, and I said the back steps." His gray eyes held hers for a moment. There was something in them she had not expected, not gratitude, which she had been braced for, not relief. Something more careful than either, as though kindness had become a thing he did not know how to hold without first checking it for what it might cost him. "My name is Colt Warden," he said. Nora did not give him hers. "Not yet." "Water your horse," she said again. "Then come around back." She watched him lead the gelding to the trough. He dismounted with one hand on the saddle horn, lowering himself with the deliberate patience of a man who had learned that moving fast cost more than it saved. When he reached the trough, he let the horse drink before he bent to splash water on his own face. He unbuckled the saddle and lifted it off. He rubbed the horse's neck with the flat of his hand, running his palm along the animal's jaw and up between its ears, speaking something low and quiet that she could not hear from the porch. She stood there and watched and felt something she had not expected and did not particularly welcome. She had expected a dangerous man to look dangerous. She had expected the carelessness of someone who did not account for the things around him. Instead, he moved like a man who had learned to account for everything, every step, every word, every small gesture, as though the world kept a ledger and he was always trying to bring his balance closer to even. She went inside before he came around to the back steps. By the time his knock came, 2 quiet taps against the door frame. Nothing demanding about them. She had laid out what she needed on the kitchen table. Clean cloth, a pot of water on the stove, just short of boiling, needle and thread in Walter's old sewing tin. The small brown bottle of carbolic that had lived in Walter's medical kit since a doctor in Dodge City had pressed it into his hands 6 years ago and told him that infections killed more men on the frontier than bullets ever did. Walter had laughed at that, said he planned to avoid both. She had not touched the bottle since January. She picked it up now without allowing herself to think about that and set it on the table with everything else. She opened the back door. Colt Warden stood on the steps with his hat in his hand and his shirt dark on the left side and his face composed into something careful and entirely still. He looked at the things she had laid out on the table. Something moved through his expression, a brief tightening behind the eyes, a recognition that this moment asked a kind of trust from him that he had not practiced in a long time, possibly longer than he could clearly remember. "Sit," she said. He sat. When he pulled his shirt loose from the wound, Nora drew one careful breath and held it a moment. A deep graze along the ribs, raw and dark-edged, the kind of wound a bullet leaves when it decides to pass through instead of stay. Painful, dangerous if neglected, but not the worst she had seen, and not death if handled right and soon. Walter had once taken a fence nail through his palm and refused to let her clean it for 2 days because he said he had fences to mend and could not spare the time. By the 3rd morning he could not make a fist. She had cleaned it then, with him cursing quietly into his sleeve, and she had felt no particular sympathy for his stubbornness, only a grim satisfaction at having been right about what waiting cost. "You've had luck," she said, looking at the wound. "That's not the word I'd have chosen. It is if you've seen the alternative." He looked at the wound, then away. "Fair enough." She cleaned it while he gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. His jaw went tight. He did not curse. He did not reach for her wrist. He did not make a single rough movement in her direction. He simply held still and endured it the way a man endures weather, because there is no point arguing with it and no way to make it stop before it decides to. Outside, the wind pressed along the house walls. The lamp on the table threw a small yellow circle. Beyond the kitchen window, the yard had gone dark, and the barn sat as a black shape against a sky that still held a thin purple line at the far horizon. "Who shot you?" Nora asked. "Men who work for a man named Dutch Rains." She paused with the cloth in her hand. She had heard that name. Not closely, not the way you hear the name of someone you have met, the way you hear thunder before you can locate the storm. In town, at the mercantile counter, the name had passed between men in lowered voices when they thought no one nearby was paying attention. Something about cattle drives that did not belong to the man running them. Something about a deputy found outside a jail in Ellsworth. Something about land deeds that had changed hands without the owners agreeing to any change. "What does Dutch Rains want with you?" she asked. "Something I'm carrying that he wants back." "What are you carrying?" "Something that isn't his." Nora tied the final strip of cloth around his ribs and stepped back. "That's a careful answer. It's the honest one. Honest and complete aren't the same thing." He looked at her then, directly for the first time without the careful distance he had kept since the gate. His gray eyes were clearer than she had expected, given the pain and the exhaustion and whatever weight he carried inside all of that. "You're right," he said, and his voice was quieter than before. "They aren't." "This is my house," she said. "I know, my land. I know that too. If trouble followed you here, I have a right to know about it before it reaches my front gate." He was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than was comfortable. Then he said, "If I'm still here when the sun comes up, I'll tell you more than I want to." She held his gaze. It was not a promise made easily or lightly. She could hear the weight of it. "You'll sleep in the barn," she said. "There's dry hay in the far stall. Breakfast is at first light if you're still breathing." He started to speak. "Don't tell me you don't need feeding," she said. "You can barely sit straight." He closed his mouth. Something that lived in the neighborhood of respect settled briefly in his expression before he put his hat back on and stood carefully, with one hand braced on the table edge. "Thank you," he said. "Ma'am." "Nora," she said. Nora Hardin. He looked at her as though the name meant something to him, as though he was placing it somewhere he intended to keep it. Then he nodded once and went out through the back door, taking the cold air with him. She stood beside the table and listened to his footsteps cross the yard. She heard the barn door creak open. She heard the gelding shift in the stall, a soft sound, the sound of an animal recognizing someone familiar. She washed the cloth in the basin. She returned the carbolic to the tin. She checked the back door latch and then the front. She stood at the kitchen window for a while and looked at the dark shape of the barn against the darker sky, and told herself she had done the reasonable thing. A man was wounded. She had cleaned the wound. She had offered the barn, not the house. She had kept the shotgun close. She had been careful. She believed most of that. Before she put out the lamp, she crossed the kitchen to straighten the cloth she had left folded on the table. As her hand moved across the wood, her fingers found something that had not been there before she opened the back door. A small leather pouch. It must have slipped from his coat when he stood. The cord had worked loose, and a folded piece of paper had pushed itself halfway out of the opening. Nora stood and looked at it. She thought about carrying it to the barn and knocking. She thought about leaving it where it was until morning. Then the paper slid a little further, and she caught it before it could fall. She unfolded it under the lamp. It was a wanted notice, printed in dark ink on paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had gone soft as cloth. A name at the top in heavy type, Jack Voss. Below it a physical description that matched the man sleeping in her barn with precision. Tall, dark-haired, gray-eyed, last seen riding a black gelding, wanted for the murder of Deputy Samuel Cross and the theft of cattle in Ellsworth County. Nora read it twice. Then she saw the handwriting. At the bottom of the notice, beneath the official printed text, someone had added a single line in a different ink. A slightly lighter shade, written with a different pen, added after the notice had already been printed and folded. The letters slanted slightly to the right and were written with a careful, deliberate pressure, the way a person writes something they need to say and are not sure they will have another chance to say it. Not guilty of Cross's death. Proof in Hayes City. She stood under the lamp and read those 9 words 4 times. The printed notice called Jack Voss a killer. But the handwritten line beneath it had not been added by any lawman. A lawman would have stamped it, initialed it, made it part of the official record. This was written the way a person writes something private and urgent, something that matters more than procedure. Nora looked toward the window. The barn was dark, no lantern burning inside. No sound except the occasional shift of the horse in the stall. She thought about the way the man in her barn had let the horse drink before taking water himself. She thought about the way he had gripped the table and endured the carbolic without a sound or a curse or a single rough gesture toward her. She thought about the way he had said her name, Nora Hardin, as though it was something he intended to treat with care. And she thought about the crow lifting off the fence post east of the gate, startled by something on the road she had not been able to see. She folded the notice and carried it to Walter's desk in the corner of the sitting room. She opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of land receipts and correspondence, was a bundle of letters tied with a length of blue ribbon. Letters she had written before they were married, which Walter had kept in the inside pocket of his coat, carried with him every day until the day he did not come back from the south pasture. She had found them there, pressed against his chest when she brought him home. She placed the wanted notice on top of the letters and closed the drawer. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind work around the corners of the house and thought about a man riding under a false name who carried another man's words folded in his coat. She thought about Dutch Raines. She thought about a dead deputy and what he might have known and what that knowledge might have cost him. She thought about what kind of person writes a handwritten line at the bottom of a wanted notice and what moment they were in when they wrote it. She thought about Deputy Samuel Cross and whether anyone had told his family. In the hour before gray dawn, she rose without lighting a lamp, dressed in the dark, and went to sit in the chair beside the cold stove with the shotgun across her knees and the wanted notice folded in her apron pocket. She sat there and watched the darkness outside the window and waited for the morning to tell her what it had decided. Light came cold and without warmth, the flat, pale light of December that does its job and nothing more. Frost had come in the night. It lay silver across the yard, along the top rail of the fence, on the long dead grass beyond the gate. The pump handle wore a thin coat of ice. The sky was the color of old tin, giving nothing back. Nora wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, tucked the shotgun in the crook of her arm, and crossed the yard. The barn door stood open, a hand's width. The gelding raised his head when she stepped inside, ears forward, calm and steady. His near foreleg had been rubbed down with a cloth, and the saddle was hung properly over the stall rail, the bridle coiled neatly beside it. Colt Warden sat with his back against the far wall, shoulders against the hay bales, hat tipped low over his face. She stopped inside the door and looked at him and felt, for one sharp second, the specific dread that comes to a person who has learned what stillness can sometimes mean. Then he spoke without lifting the hat. "I didn't touch anything that wasn't the hay and the water," he said. "In case that's the first question. It wasn't." She set the shotgun against the stall post. "The first question is why you look like a man who has been awake all night." He pushed the hat back from his face. He looked worse than he had in the kitchen. The fever had not found him yet, but pain had settled into him more thoroughly overnight, carving new lines around his mouth and across his forehead. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had not been permitted to put it down. I don't sleep easily in unfamiliar places, he said. You've been sleeping in open country for weeks by the look of it. He considered that. Fair point. Nora stepped forward and crouched to check the bandage through his open shirt. It had held. No fresh blood had come through in the night she stood. There's coffee on the stove, she said. Come inside. He looked past her toward the barn door. I know what you're thinking, she said. You asked for the barn and I gave it, and now you don't want to take more than was offered. He said nothing. Come inside anyway. Because what I found in my kitchen last night means we need to talk before either of us decides what comes next. That settled into him differently than everything else she had said. Not the stillness of a man resting. The stillness of a man who has heard a sound he recognized and has gone very quiet because of it. What did you find? He asked. Come inside, she said, and I'll show you. He came. Slowly, one arm held close to his bandaged side, each movement measured, but he came. He sat at the kitchen table in the same chair as the night before, and wrapped both hands around the cup she set in front of him and looked at the wanted notice she placed on the table between them with the expression of a man who has been bracing for something and has finally heard it arrive. He did not rush to explain it. He did not construct a quick story shaped to fit the situation. He looked at the paper for a long moment, and then he looked at her, and what she saw in his face was something she recognized from her own reflection on certain mornings. The face of a person deciding how much of the truth is safe to release at once. My name is Colt Warden, he said. That's real. Jack Voss was a name Dutch Raines gave me 4 years ago because men who use their own names are easier to trace back to the man who hired them. Nora waited. I worked for Raines for 4 years, he said. Not as a gunman, not as a killer. I rode with drives that didn't belong to Raines. I stood outside rooms while frightened men signed documents they had not agreed to sign. I collected debts that were framed as legal obligations and were not. I knew what I was doing while I was doing it. He stopped. I'm not telling you otherwise. What changed, she said. Deputy Samuel Cross. Nora looked at the handwritten line at the bottom of the notice. Cross came to me 8 months ago, Colt said. He had a ledger, names, payments, land transfers, signed statements from ranchers who had been too frightened to approach the law on their own, enough to bring Dutch Raines before a federal judge who had not already been purchased. Cross needed someone who knew Raines's routes, Raines' men, Raines's schedule well enough to move the evidence safely. He needed someone already inside the operation, and he chose you. He told me he had watched me for 3 months, and I was the only man in Raines's outfit who ever looked like he knew he was doing something wrong. Colt turned the cup in his hands. He said that wasn't much, but it was more than he'd found anywhere else. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the December light pressed flat and gray against the glass. Somewhere near the barn, the loose hinge on the door tapped once in a gust and went still. We were moving the ledger north toward Hayes City, Colt said. There's a federal judge there, a man named Aldrich, who Cross trusted. No connection to Raines, no reason to be bought. Cross believed if the ledger reached Aldrich, Raines could not stop what came after. His hands tightened slightly around the cup. We were ambushed outside a line shack north of Ellsworth, 4 of Raines' men, Cal Denton leading them. Nora set her own cup down quietly. Cross told me to draw them off. Said he could get the ledger out if I pulled the riders east. I argued. He didn't argue back. He had the face of a man who has already finished deciding, and I knew that arguing was spending time we did not have. A pause. So I rode east. I pulled 3 of them after me, lost them in a dry wash after dark, and doubled back. He stopped. Looked at the table for a moment. Cross was still there when I got back. He hadn't been fast enough. Denton had found him. Another pause. He was still alive. Only just. Nora held still. He gave me a key, Colt said. Brass, small, a blue ribbon tied through the ring. He told me the proof was where his daughter keeps her Sunday ribbon. He told me the key opens it. His voice had gone flat, the way voices go when a person has rehearsed something so many times that the rehearsal has worn the emotion smooth. He didn't have time for more than that. I stayed with him until he was gone. Then I took the key and rode. And the ledger, Nora asked. Denton's men took it. Or they took what they believed was all of it. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed the brass key on the table between them. A small tarnished thing with a blue ribbon looped through the ring. Cross must have separated something before they got to him. Something he hid, something this key opens, somewhere in Hayes City. That's what's left. Nora looked at the key, then at the handwritten line at the bottom of the notice. Not guilty of Cross's death. Proof in Hayes City. He wrote that, she said. It was not a question. Colt nodded. He'd been watching me long enough to have the notice drawn up before we left, in case things went wrong. He must have added that line himself, a record in case he didn't make it and I was the one who did. He was writing your defense before he knew he would need to, Nora said. Cross had a daughter, Colt said, 6 years old. Her name was Clara. He kept a piece of blue ribbon in his breast pocket on every trip. Said she tied it there before he left so he would remember to come home. He set the key back on the table. I've been carrying this since November. 3 of Raines' men found me in Hayes 2 weeks ago. I've been moving west since then, trying to lose them, trying to figure out what to do next. West, Nora said. Hayes City is east, I know. He met her eyes steadily. If I lead Raines' men straight to whatever Cross hid, it gets buried before any judge sees it. I needed to lose them before I turned back. Did you lose them? He looked at the window. The frost on the glass had begun to melt in thin lines. I thought I had. That's not yes. No, he said. It isn't. Nora folded the wanted notice and placed it back on the table beside the key. She looked at both of them for a moment. A dead man's accusation, a dead man's key, a living man who had made enough wrong choices to earn the accusation, and apparently one right one to deserve the key. She thought about the crow that had lifted off the east fence post at dusk and flown north. She thought about the eyes of the man she had seen described as Silas Greer, the older one, the patient one, taking inventory of everything around him without appearing to look at any of it directly. The men following you, she said. Were there 3 of them? Something changed in his face. Yes. Why? Because last night, just before you came to the gate, I watched Crow leave the east fence post. Something had startled it from the roadside. She looked at him carefully. And this morning when I crossed the yard, I checked the road. There were horse tracks. More than one animal. They came within a quarter mile of the gate and turned back north. Colt set his cup down slowly. They know I stopped here. They may. Then they'll come back. Yes, Nora said. Which is why we're having this conversation now. Outside, the frost continued its slow retreat from the glass. The road past the gate was empty. A thin wind moved through the grass along the fence line. The morning felt very still, the way things feel still when something is about to change. Nora looked at the man across her kitchen table. A man with a false name on a printed notice and a true name that meant nothing yet to anyone with the power to help him. A man who had stayed with a dying deputy in the cold until it was over, and then carried a small brass key across 3 months of winter because it was the only way left to honor what that deputy had trusted him with. She thought about a 6-year-old girl named Clara Cross keeping her Sunday ribbon somewhere in Hayes City, not knowing that her father had hidden the most important thing in Kansas inside whatever that key opened. Nora Hardin had spent 11 months believing that the safest thing she could do was stay exactly where grief had left her and call it loyalty to the man she had lost. She was beginning to understand that grief and loyalty were not always the same thing, and that safety was not the same thing as living. Finish your coffee, she said. Then you're going to tell me everything you remember about the 3 men who followed you from Hayes, what they look like, how they ride, which one to watch most carefully and which one is just collecting wages. She stood and went to the stove. After that, we'll figure out what we're going to do. Colt looked at her with an expression she could not entirely name. It sat somewhere between the careful beginning of trust and the specific surprise of a man who has been alone with a problem for a long time and has not expected anyone to offer to share the weight of it. Yes, ma'am, he said. Nora, she said without turning around. A pause. Then quietly, Nora. She poured more coffee and did not let him see that her hands were steady only because she was concentrating very deliberately on keeping them that way. Within the hour, she knew about Cal Denton, lean, pale-eyed, a man who smiled at things that were not meant to be funny and used the smile as a form of pressure. She knew about the 2 riders who usually flanked him, one broad through the chest and largely silent, one younger, with hands that never settled, who had not yet learned to hide how frightened he was most of the time. And she knew about Silas Greer. Older than the others, Colt told her. Gray in his beard, close to 60. Quiet in a way that had nothing to do with harmlessness. The kind of quiet that meant a man was always listening, always measuring, always constructing a picture of everything around him that he never showed anyone else. Dutch Raines sent Greer when he needed something done correctly rather than quickly. He's the one I'd be most concerned about, Colt said. The others follow orders. Greer understands the entire situation. He thinks 3 moves ahead and he's patient enough to wait for all 3. Is he the one who shot you? Greer doesn't shoot from a distance, Colt said. This was the young one. Nervous finger. He touched the bandage briefly. Greer would have made certain. Nora thought about that. About a man calm enough and experienced enough that he would not act until he was sure. She was still thinking about it when the sound reached her. It came from the direction of the main road. Not loud. The low, deliberate rhythm of hooves on dry ground, moving at a pace that was neither hurrying nor wandering. Moving the way people move when they know exactly where they are going and have decided not to announce their arrival. Nora was at the window before Colt could rise. 4 riders coming up the trail from the west. Still 200 yards out, but already close enough that she could pick out the lean shape of the man in front. The brown coat open despite the cold, the pale face turned toward her house with an expression of mild, performed pleasantness. Cal Denton. She turned from the window. Barn, she said. Loft. The window that faces the road. Colt was already on his feet, face tight with pain but eyes entirely clear. I won't leave you out here to face them alone. You won't be leaving me, she said. You'll be where you can see without being seen. That is more useful right now than standing beside me and giving them what they came looking for. He looked at her for one moment. She looked back at him without moving. Go, she said. He went. Nora straightened her shawl, lifted the shotgun from beside the door, and walked out onto the porch. She did not hurry. She would not give men like Cal Denton the satisfaction of seeing a woman come out at a run. She stood at the top of her steps and watched them come up her road in the cold December morning, 4 riders raising a low line of dust, and she felt the ground solid and familiar under her boots and the weight of the gun certain in her hands, and she told herself what she had been telling herself for 11 months now. She was still here. She was still standing. Whatever this road sent her, she would meet it the way she met everything else. On her own 2 feet, with her eyes open and her hands steady. Cal Denton rode like a man who had never been told no and had come to find the experience more amusing than troubling. He sat loose in the saddle with his coat open against the cold, one hand resting on his thigh near the holster without touching it. Not reaching, demonstrating, a way of saying that he did not need to reach for it because the situation had not yet required it, and he was the one who decided when situations required things. He stopped his horse at the gate. The 3 men behind him stopped too. The thick one on the left, staring at the barn with the blank focus of a man doing arithmetic. The young one on the right, hands restless on the reins, trying to look like he was not nervous and failing. And Silas Greer, back behind the others, sitting his horse, the way water sits in a level glass. Perfectly still, taking up exactly the space he needed. Not 1 inch more. Greer did not look at Nora. He looked at the barn. "Morning, ma'am," Denton said. His voice carried the pleasantness of cold iron, a surface quality only, with nothing warm beneath it. "Road is that way," Nora said, nodding past them without moving the shotgun from the crook of her arm. "We're aware." Denton's pale eyes moved across her yard with the slow thoroughness of a man making an inventory. The pump, the woodpile, the barn door half open, the frost-soft ground between the house and the trough. "We won't take much of your time, ma'am. You're already taking it." He smiled. It did not reach his eyes or anywhere close to them. "My name is Cal Denton. We're looking for a man. Tall, dark hair, gray eyes, riding a black gelding. You may be carrying a wound." Nora said nothing. "That description cause you any concern?" Denton asked. "Descriptions of strange men at my gate always cause me concern." He glanced at the barn again. "You alone out here?" "That's not your business. No offense intended, ma'am. Just making conversation. Make it on the road." Behind him, the young rider shifted in the saddle. The thick man had not moved his eyes from the barn door. Silas Greer had not moved at all. He was looking at the upper left corner of the barn now, at the loft window that sat in shadow above the yard, and he was looking at it with an attention that was different from the way he looked at everything else. More specific, more focused. Nora kept her eyes on Denton. "A man came through here yesterday evening," she said, "before full dark. He asked for water for his horse and I gave it. He moved on." "Which direction?" "West. He said he had business in Dodge City." Denton tilted his head slightly. "Dodge City, that's what I said." "Interesting," he said, "because we came from the west and we didn't pass him on the road. Then he went around you, or you passed each other in the dark. Either way, he is not here." Denton was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is full of calculation rather than empty of thought. Then he said, "Mind if we take a look around?" "Yes," she said. He blinked. "Ma'am, I mind very much. You carry no badge. You have no authority on my land. You have my answer, which is all I agreed to give you." The thick man's hand dropped toward his belt. Nora raised the shotgun to her shoulder in one smooth motion. Not fast, not dramatic. The way you raise a tool you have used 10,000 times. The way the motion completes itself naturally, no different from lifting a water pail or a fence rail, except for what it meant. "Move that hand 1 more inch," she said, "and your friends will be lifting you onto your horse instead of riding beside you." The thick man froze. The young rider's face went a color between chalk and sage. Denton looked at the shotgun. He looked at Nora's face. Then he looked slowly and deliberately at the barn loft window. He held his gaze there for 2 full seconds. Nora did not follow it. She kept her eyes on Denton. Then he smiled again, and this time the smile was different. It was the smile of a man who has located something he was searching for and decided not to pick it up yet. Not because he couldn't, because waiting suited his purposes better than moving now. "We'll be moving along," he said. "That's a sensible decision." He touched his hat brim. "When you see that man again, you tell him Cal Denton sends his regards, and that Dutch Rains wants what belongs to him." "I don't carry messages for men I haven't invited onto my land," Nora said. "No, ma'am," Denton said pleasantly. "I suppose you don't." He turned his horse. The thick man followed. The young rider followed. Silas Greer was last. Before he turned, he looked directly at Nora for the first time since they had stopped at the gate. His eyes were a dark, muddied brown, the color of creek water after 3 days of rain, and they held nothing she could easily read. He was not angry. He was not impressed. He was not performing any of the things that Denton performed. He was simply observing, filing things away in some interior ledger with the patience of a man who has always found that information, properly stored, pays better than hurry. He turned his horse and rode. Nora held the shotgun raised until all 4 of them had gone back, down the trail, and the dust had absorbed their shapes and then settled again, and the road was empty in both directions. Then she lowered the gun. She stood on the porch and looked at the empty road, and the empty sky, and the frost still white on the fence posts where the sun had not yet reached, and she felt the trembling start in her arms and move through her chest, and she breathed through it the way she had learned to breathe through difficult things. Steady, measured, one breath finding the next until the trembling became something she could manage, and manageable became something she could stand inside without showing. She was still standing there when Colt's footsteps crossed the yard behind her. She did not turn until he reached the bottom of the porch steps. "Denton believed you," he said. "Denton believed what he wanted to believe," she said. Greer didn't accept a word of it. No, he wouldn't. He looked at the loft window. I know. I was in it. Did he see you? No. But he knew something was in there worth looking at. Colt's voice was quiet and level, carrying the specific weight of a man assessing how badly a situation has developed. He'll come back. Not with Denton. On his own. Nora turned and looked at him in the thin December light. He looked worse than he had in the kitchen. The pain was sitting heavier on him now, pulling at the corners of his eyes, settling into the lines around his mouth. Then we don't give him the opportunity, she said. Colt looked at her. We leave before noon, she said. A pause. Nora, you don't have to do this. You told those men Dodge City, she said. I confirmed it. That lie is mine now, too. If they discover it, this ranch is not safe whether you're here or not. She turned and went inside without waiting for his response. Eat something. We'll need to move in an hour. They left at 10:30. The sun had climbed high enough to take the worst of the frost off the ground, but not high enough to put any warmth into the air. Nora packed 2 saddlebags with the efficiency of a woman who had learned that what you carry matters less than where you're going and why. Hard biscuits, dried beef, a small tin of coffee, the carbolic and clean cloth, extra shells, Walter's trail map folded into her coat pocket alongside the wanted notice and the brass key, which she took from the kitchen table without asking Colt and put away without explaining. He watched her do it. He said nothing. That told her something. Before she mounted, she went to the oak tree behind the house. The ground was hard and cold under her boots. Frost still clung to the north face of Walter's marker where the December sun had not yet found it. She had meant to whitewash the marker before winter came down hard. She had meant to do a great many things that 11 months of doing everything alone had quietly moved further and further down the list. She rested her gloved hand on the wood. I don't know if this is the right thing, she said quietly, but I know that staying still is not the same as being safe. You taught me that, even if you didn't mean it as a lesson. The wind moved the bare branches above her. She waited, not for an answer she did not expect, but for the feeling of having said the thing out loud. It always made breathing easier. She walked back to where Colt held both horses. He did not ask what she had said. She was grateful for that more than she could have put into words. They rode east. The land opened around them the way Kansas land does when you leave the creek bottoms and get up onto the open plain. Wide and honest and without concealment, the sky pressing down enormous and pale above them, the grass running out in every direction toward a horizon that never seemed to get any closer no matter how far you rode toward it. Nora led. She knew this ground the way you know a room you have lived in for years, not by thinking about it, but by the accumulated weight of 9 years of small attentions. The soft places in the trail where underground water ran even in dry months. The ridge that looked crossable from below and was not. The creekford that ran knee-deep on the horses after any significant rain, no matter how low it looked from the bank. Colt rode slightly behind her left shoulder without comment or adjustment. He was letting her set the pace and the line. Not performing deference, simply doing it because she knew the ground and he didn't, and he was the kind of man who let the facts of a situation determine his behavior in it. They did not talk much in the first hour. The cold made speech feel costly, and the landscape made silence feel right. Nora watched the horizon and the sky and the ground ahead of them, and once when a hawk lifted off a fence post half a mile to the south and began climbing in a long, slow spiral, she watched it for a full minute without looking away. You're reading everything, Colt said. I always am. What does it say right now? She thought about it. Nothing yet. But it's paying attention. He did not ask her to explain that. She appreciated it. They reached the creek crossing near midday. The water was low and the crossing was easy, hooves loud on the gravel bar and then quiet again on the far bank. Colt dismounted carefully on the far side, one hand near his ribs, and crouched to look at the mud at the water's edge. He studied the ground for a long moment before he spoke. 4 horses came through here, within the last 2, maybe 3 hours. Nora looked at the bank. The impressions were clear once she knew to look. Deep at the edge where the horses had hesitated before stepping in, shallower where they had crossed the gravel. Denton's group, she said. 3 sets going east together. He stood, jaw tight with the effort. One turned south. Nora looked south. The land climbed to a long ridge there, covered in sage and pale grass and broken at the top by sandstone outcrops that caught and redirected the wind. High ground, long sight lines in both directions along the valley. That's not toward Dodge City, she said. No, Greer. Yes. She looked east at the main trail, then south at the ridge, and she understood it before Colt said it. He's not circling back. He went south to get elevation. There's a ridge down there that runs parallel to the Hayes City Road. From the top, you can see 15 miles of trail in either direction. He's not following us, Nora said. He's going to watch the road and wait for us to appear on it. He knows we'll take the main road east. It's the obvious route. Nora did not open the map. She already knew what it showed and what it did not show. She turned her horse north off the trail before Colt could suggest anything. Where are you going? He asked. There's a cattle track that runs northeast from here. Comes out above the Aldrich Creek drainage and follows the high ground into the back end of the valley. It adds 6 or 7 miles. Colt urged his horse after hers. Greer won't know it. It hasn't been used since the Morrison herd came through 4 years ago. It won't appear on any survey map he's seen. She looked back at him once. Walter showed me every route within 20 miles of our land. He said a person should always know more ways in and out than anyone else knows about. He was right, Colt said. He was right about most things, Nora said, and faced forward again. The cattle track was as overgrown and difficult as she remembered. Sage grabbed at the horse's legs. The sandstone outcrops required careful picking of a line. The dry wash near the top had eroded badly in the years since anyone had used the route, and they had to pick their way across it on loose stones that shifted under every step. But the ridge to the south showed no silhouette of a watcher against the sky, and the main trail, briefly visible when they crested the high ground, carried no riders in either direction. They came down into the lower country as the December sun began its early slide toward the horizon, and the cold deepened immediately as the light changed. The kind of cold that comes in at the ears and works inward. Nora saw the cabin in the last of the clear light. It sat where Aldrich Creek bent against a hillside, tucked under a stand of old cottonwoods with their backs against the slope. Smoke from the chimney, a mule in the corral. A woodpile stacked with the precision of someone who had learned early that survival and tidiness were often expressions of the same thing. Agnes Pruitt's place. Nora had been here twice before. The first time Agnes had sent word asking for seed catalogs from town, a 12-mile round trip that Nora had not considered refusing because Agnes Pruitt was the kind of woman whose small request you did not decline, partly from respect and partly because she had a long memory for being ignored. The second time had been 2 winters past, when Agnes had appeared at the Hardin Ranch in a snowstorm, having seen smoke from a chimney that should not have been lit, and brought food for a family of 4 who had taken shelter in Nora's empty calving barn without asking. Agnes had not announced she was bringing food. She had simply arrived with it. Nora had liked her immediately and without reservation. Agnes opened the cabin door before they reached the porch. She stood in the frame with a lantern held high and an expression of complete unsurprise, as though wounded strangers and determined widows arrived at her door on a regular schedule, and she had long since stopped finding it remarkable. "Nora Hardin," she said. "You're a considerable way from your kitchen." "I know it," Nora said. Agnes looked at Colt, at his side, at the way he held himself in the saddle. "He needs to come inside. That was my intention. Then stop sitting in the cold and do it." Inside, Agnes moved with the economical efficiency of someone who had done a great many hard things and learned that extra motion was simply wasted effort. She cleared the table, put water on the stove, and produced from a shelf a tin of salve, a roll of clean bandaging cloth, a surgical needle in a small leather case, and 3 glass jars of dried herbs arranged in a precise order that suggested she knew exactly what she intended to use each one for. The shelf also held a Bible that showed clear signs of being read regularly and of being argued with on occasion. "Sit him down," Agnes said. Colt sat. Agnes examined the wound with the brisk, focused attention of someone who had served as a field nurse in the war and had long since seen enough that very little registered on her face as either surprising or particularly alarming. "Whoever put the first stitches in did reasonable work," she said. "I did," Nora said. Agnes glanced at her. She began cleaning the wound with a thoroughness that made Colt's knuckles go white on the chair edge. "You tore it," she told him flatly. "Riding hard, probably combined with climbing something foolish." "Barn loft," he said through his teeth. "Men in barn lofts," Agnes said, in the tone of a woman who has accumulated many years of opinions on the subject and sees no reason to summarize them. She worked without unnecessary conversation. Nora put the coffee on and sat at the far end of the table and felt, for the first time since morning, the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort but from sustained alertness, from hours of reading every sound and shadow and movement for what it might mean. Agnes tied off the new bandage, stepped back and looked at Colt with the direct, unornamented gaze of someone who has decided to ask a thing and intends to ask it plainly. "What did you do?" she said. "Quite a bit," he said. "Specifically,
The part that brought you here.
he told her. The essential version, which was still the complete one. Dutch reins, the ledger, Deputy Cross, the key. Agnes listened without interrupting, which told Nora she considered it serious. Agnes interrupted most things. When he finished, Agnes looked at Nora. "And you?" "I lied to the men looking for him," Nora said, "which means my ranch is not safe whether he's there or not." Agnes considered this for a moment. She poured coffee for all 3 of them, set the cups on the table, and sat down. "Silas Greer," she said. "Is he with Denton?" Colt looked at her. "You know him?" "I know of him. Different thing entirely." Agnes wrapped both hands around her cup. "He came through this area 2 years ago, asking questions about land boundaries near the Morrison place. Polite, too quiet. The kind of quiet that means a man is calculating something the whole time you're talking to him." She looked at Colt. "He is the one to concern yourself with." "I know," Colt said. "Do you know that he won't come with Denton?" "I've been saying that since this morning." "Then you understand he'll come here. Eventually." "Not eventually," Agnes said tonight. She rose and moved to the window, holding the lantern low so its light would not reach the glass and give her away to anyone watching from outside. He's patient, but he understands you have a limited window before Hayes City, and whatever cross left there gets close enough to the light that he can't stop it. He won't wait until morning. Nora looked at Colt. He looked back at her. They were running the same calculation and arriving at the same answer. Is there a place in this cabin that isn't immediately obvious? Nora asked Agnes. Agnes turned from the window. Her eyes went to the braided rug near the stove, an oval thing worn soft from years of foot traffic. Without a word, she crossed to it and turned back one edge. A trapdoor, fitted flush with the floorboards and nearly invisible unless you were looking specifically for it. A storage space beneath, low ceilinged but long enough for a man to lie flat among the root vegetables and preserving jars that lived there between seasons. Colt looked at it, then at Nora. No, it isn't a question, she said. I am not going to lie under a floor while what? Nora said. She kept her voice level. Without heat. While I handle this, you've been in enough difficult situations to know the difference between when being present helps and when it costs more than it gains. Which is this? He was quiet. Which is this? She said again. He looked at the trapdoor, at his hands, at the fresh bandage Agnes had just put on. Then he said very quietly, this. Then we know what needs doing. Greer came 4 hours later. Nora had been listening for him for an hour and a half, sitting at the table with a cup of cooling coffee, appearing to do nothing in particular. Agnes sat in her chair near the stove with her eyes apparently closed. Nora had noticed that Agnes's breathing never quite reached the depth of actual sleep. The mule in the corral moved first, a single shift of weight and the small sounds that came with it. Then silence again. One knock at the door. Quiet, deliberate. The knock of a man who has decided exactly how loud to knock and what that volume is meant to communicate. Agnes opened her eyes, looked at Nora. Nora looked at the rug over the trapdoor. Agnes opened the door. Silas Greer stood in the dark with his hat in his hand. He was older than Nora had expected, even knowing he was close to 60, with a gray-streaked beard and the lean, maintained look of a man who has spent decades in outdoor work and made a kind of accommodation with what it costs the body. His eyes in the lantern light were a dark, muddied brown, and they moved from Agnes to the room behind her, and then to Nora, and then across everything else in the cabin with the systematic, unhurried attention of someone who is not looking at any one thing but is instead assembling a complete picture of everything at once. Evening, he said. His voice was dry and quiet, the voice of a man who found that most things required less volume than other people used for them. Sorry for the hour. I saw your light. I keep a light, Agnes said. People in this area know that. They do. He did not move to enter. He stood in the doorway and looked at the interior the way a careful man looks at a river crossing before he commits to it. I'm looking for a man. Goes by Jack Voss among other names. Never heard it, Agnes said. His eyes moved to Nora. I'm a neighbor, Nora said. On my way to visit family in Hayes City. Stopped for the night. Hayes City, he said. Traveling alone? I am. He looked at the table. 3 cups, 2 women. Greer's eyes settled on the 3rd cup and rested there. Agnes reached across the table, lifted the 3rd cup and drank from it with the serene composure of a woman who has never in her life been rattled by a man in a doorway and does not intend to start now. I drink from 2 cups in the evenings, she said. 1 hot and 1 cooled down, helps me sleep. Greer looked at her. Agnes looked back at him with an expression of complete, immovable patience. Greer said. He looked at the floor, not at the rug specifically, but near it. At the way the lamplight fell across the boards in that area, at the slight differences in the grain and the gaps between the planks. Something shifted in his face by less than a degree, the movement of a compass needle when iron comes close. Nora felt the cold move up her spine. I won't trouble you further, Greer said. He put his hat on with the deliberateness of a man in no hurry for any of the next several things. If you see a man on a black gelding, I'd advise against involving yourself. He draws trouble to the people around him. Most strangers do, Agnes said. That's why I'm careful about which ones I let through the door. The faintest suggestion of something moved at the corner of Greer's mouth. Not warmth. Something colder than that. Good night. He went. Agnes kept her hand on the door latch and did not move for 30 full seconds. Then she crossed to the window and looked out into the dark for another 30. He's gone, she said. For now. He knows, Nora said. He suspects, Agnes corrected. He is too careful a man to act on suspicion alone. He'll watch the road. He'll wait to see which direction we move at first light. She turned from the window. You need to leave before he can get positioned, before there's enough light to see by. Nora crossed to the rug and knocked twice on the trapdoor. It opened from below. Colt's face appeared in the gap, tight with the effort of having held still in a small dark space while pain worked steadily at his side. He looked at Nora first. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not tonight. He understood. He climbed out slowly. Agnes helped him without being asked, without commentary. He sat on the edge of the cot she pointed him to and pressed one hand flat against his bandaged ribs and breathed through what that cost him. Nora poured fresh coffee and carried a cup to where he sat. He took it and looked up at her. 3 cups, he said quietly. Agnes handled it. He looked at Agnes, who had returned to her chair and appeared to be actually sleeping now. Does anything unsettle her? Nothing I've ever found, Nora said. She sat in the chair across from the cot and held her own cup and listened to the wind search the cabin walls for a way in, finding none, and thought about Silas Greer standing in the lantern light and looking at the floor near the rug. She thought about the things she had seen shift in his face. Less than a degree. Enough. Colt, she said. He looked at her. The key, she said. Deputy Cross said the proof was where his daughter keeps her Sunday ribbon. That's what he said. Clara Cross, 6 years old. Nora turned the brass key in her fingers. The blue ribbon moved against her hand. A 6-year-old girl keeps her ribbons somewhere specific. Something that's hers. A box, most likely. Something small that matters to her. Colt was watching her with the still attention of someone who can see that another person is working toward something. This key doesn't open a bank box, Nora said. It doesn't open a document chest. It's too small. It's the size of something a child owns. She looked up at him. Cross didn't hide the proof in any official location. He hid it where Dutch Raines would never think to look. Colt said nothing. He hid it in his daughter's ribbon box, Nora said. In his own house, in Hayes City. Because no one searches a child's keepsakes for evidence against a criminal operation. Because the most important thing in the state of Kansas is sitting in a little girl's bedroom right now. And the only person besides a dying man who knows what that key opens is sitting in this room. Colt put his coffee down and looked at the key in her hand with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not relief, not hope. Something that sat further back than either of those, the expression of a man who has been carrying a thing for months without fully understanding what he was carrying, and has just had both the weight and the meaning of it made plain at once. He told me with his last breath, Colt said. I thought I hadn't understood him well enough. I thought I had missed something, he meant to say. You didn't miss anything, Nora said. You just needed someone else to hear it. Outside, the December wind pressed against the cabin walls. The fire in the stove popped once. Agnes turned in her chair without opening her eyes and pulled her shawl more closely around her shoulders. Colt reached into his coat and held the key out toward Nora. You keep it, he said. She looked at him. You understood what it opens when I had been carrying it for 3 months without figuring it out, he said. And if Greer finds us on the road tomorrow, he will search me first. He will not expect it to be with you. Nora took the key. She held it a moment, feeling the small weight of it, the blue ribbon soft against her fingers. A dead man's hope, a child's keepsake, whatever justice still had a chance of surviving compressed into something small enough to carry in a coat pocket. She put it away. Before first light, she said. Before first light, he said. Agnes spoke from her chair without opening her eyes. There's cornbread on the shelf. Eat before you make any more plans. Plans made on empty stomachs are plans as made poorly. Nora looked at Colt. He looked at her. Yes, ma'am, they both said, nearly together. Agnes almost smiled. It was a very small thing, barely visible, and it was gone before either of them could have sworn with certainty that they had seen it. But Nora saw it, and in the cold of that December night, with Silas Greer somewhere in the dark outside and Hayes City still a hard day's ride east and a dead man's evidence waiting in a child's ribbon box, that small almost smile was enough to hold on to. They left Agnes Pruitt's cabin at 4 in the morning, when the dark was still complete and the cold had found the particular depth it reaches in the hours before dawn. Not dramatic cold, not the kind that announces itself, just the relentless pressing kind that works against every surface with patient, impersonal insistence. Agnes stood in the doorway with the lantern held low and watched them go without saying goodbye. What she said was, stay off the Aldrich Road until you reached the grain depot. Cut north from there. Nora had nodded once. Agnes went inside and closed the door, and that was the end of it. There was a completeness to Agnes Pruitt that Nora had always found more steadying than most people's long conversations. She did not perform concern. She expressed it in the form of useful information and then stepped aside. They rode the first hour in full dark and full silence. The horses picked their footing on ground they could not fully see. Nora kept her eyes on the horizon rather than the ground, because the horizon was where warning would come from first. Colt rode just behind her left shoulder. She could hear his breathing in the cold air, controlled, measured, but not easy. The wound had been asked too much of for 2 days now, and that kind of debt accumulated without showing its full accounting until the moment it chose to present it. How bad is it? She asked, without turning. Manageable, he said. That's not what I asked. A pause. Bad enough that I would rather not think about it while we're moving. Fair enough, she said and faced forward. The sky began its first gray suggestion of change around 5:30. Not light yet, but the dark becoming less solid. Shapes returning from it gradually, the line of a ridge, the mass of a windbreak, the pale slash of a dry wash crossing the trail ahead. They reached the grain depot at the edge of the Hayes City Valley shortly after 7, the sun just clearing the horizon and doing its thin December work on the frost. A large unpainted building at a road crossroads closed at this hour, with a freight wagon at the side and 2 horses in a back corral who looked at them with mild, unhurried interest. Nora cut north from the depot as Agnes had directed, following a track along the back side of a long, low rise that kept them off the main road. She watched the road from the high ground as they paralleled it. 2 freight wagons heading west, a single rider on a gray horse moving the wrong direction to be a concern. Nothing else. Greer, Colt said from behind her. He's not on the road, she said, which means he's already in town. I've been assuming that since Agnes's cabin, Nora said. They came into Hayes City from the north on a track that brought them out behind the livery stable at the top of Main Street. Hayes City in December was quieter than in the driving season, but never truly quiet. The railroad kept it moving year-round. Men on the boardwalks, horses at the hitching posts, a dozen chimneys laying smoke flat across the rooftops in the still morning air. Nora had been here perhaps a dozen times in 9 years, enough to navigate it, not enough to feel comfortable inside it. Towns had always felt to her like rooms with too many people and not enough ways out. Marshal Holt's office, she said. Federal Marshal. Do you know where he keeps it? Above the land registry on 2nd Street, Colt said. 2 years ago, anyway. Then that's where we start. They had not gone 40 yards down the alley behind the livery when the voice came from their left, from the gap between the livery and a feed store, quiet and flat and carrying the particular authority of a man who has never needed volume to make himself understood. Colt Warden. A man stepped out of the shadow. 55 perhaps, leaned through the shoulders and chest, with a close-cropped gray beard and a federal marshal's badge on his coat that caught the morning light briefly before his coat shifted and covered it again. He had a revolver on his hip. His hand was not on it. But his hand was near it, in the way that comes from 30 years of being ready. His eyes went to Colt first, then to Nora, then back to Colt. Marshal Theo Holt, he said, I've been looking for you since November. Colt's hands rested visible on the saddle horn. I know, he said. Jack Voss, Holt said. Colt Warden. Jack Voss was a name Dutch Raines assigned me. Holt looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who has listened to a great many people tell him a great many things and has developed a precise and calibrated skepticism about all of it. That's an interesting distinction to draw while a warrant is outstanding. I have something that may change your thinking about the warrant, Nora said. Holt looked at her. He looked at her the way some men looked at her, with the small recalibration that happened when they realized she was not simply present beside someone else, but was in fact the person to be addressed. She had learned to notice how quickly different men made that adjustment. It told her something reliable about them. Holt made it quickly. Who are you? He asked. Nora Hardin. I ranch west of Dodge City. I have a wanted notice in my coat that was found among this man's belongings, and at the bottom of that notice there is a handwritten line I believe you will recognize. She reached into her coat slowly with her movements deliberate and visible, and produced the folded notice and held it out. Holt took it. He unfolded it and read it. His face as he read was the face of a man holding something contained that would rather not be contained. She watched his eyes move across the printed text and then reach the bottom of the page and stop. He read the handwritten line twice. She could tell by the small movement of his eyes. Not guilty of Cross's death. Proof in Hayes City. Where did you come by this? He said, and his voice had changed. The professional flatness was still there, but something had moved beneath it, something that was not professional at all. It fell from his coat 2 nights ago at my ranch. Holt looked at Colt. Samuel Cross gave you this. He had the notice drawn up before we left for Ellsworth, Colt said. He added the line himself. He said he wanted a record in case things went wrong. A pause. They went wrong. Holt folded the notice with the care you give something that has become important to you. I know he's dead, he said. I've spent 2 months trying to learn how and by whose hand. He looked at Colt and the grief was present in his eyes alongside everything else not hidden, not performed, just there. Were you with him? Yes. Did you? No. Colt said it without heat or defensiveness, the way a person states something that has been true regardless of what anyone believed about it. I was drawing off Raines' men so he could move the ledger. When I came back, Denton had already found him. I stayed with him until he was gone. He gave me a key and told me where the proof was. I've been carrying it since. Holt was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the notice again, at the handwriting he clearly recognized. When he looked up, his expression had settled into something more useful than grief. Purpose. Show me the key, he said. Nora produced it from her coat and held it on her open palm. Holt looked at it. His eyes moved to the blue ribbon and held there for a moment longer than they stayed anywhere else. Samuel's daughter, he said quietly enough that it was almost to himself. Clara, Nora said. She's 6 years old. He said it as a weight he was accounting for rather than information he was sharing. Her mother brought her to my office 3 weeks ago, said men had been watching the house. Nora and Colt looked at each other. 3 weeks, Colt said. Where are they now? I moved them somewhere safer. But the house has been sitting empty since. He looked at the key in Nora's palm. If the proof is in that house, we need to go there now, Nora said. Holt did not argue. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled short and sharp. From the far end of the alley, a young deputy appeared, moving quickly, a man of perhaps 25 with an alert, open face and the slightly breathless look of someone who has been waiting in position for longer than was comfortable. Briggs, Holt said. With us, leave your horse. Briggs fell in without questions. Nora appreciated the economy of that. They went on foot through the back alleys of Hayes City, moving quickly and without noise, Holt leading with the certainty of a man who knows every inch of a town he has worked for years, Nora beside him, Colt behind her, Briggs watching the cross streets at the rear. The town went about its morning around them, entirely unaware of what it contained. Cross's house was on a side street 2 blocks east of the main road. A white frame house, small and well kept, with a porch and a window box that would have held flowers in summer and held only dry stalks now. The red ribbon Clara had tied to the porch rail before her father's last departure was still there. Faded and weathered, but still there, still moving in the small cold wind. The front door was not fully closed. Holt stopped them with a raised hand 20 feet from the porch. He studied the door, the gap, the darkness visible through it. "How long has it been open?" Nora said quietly. "Not long," Holt said. "The wind hasn't moved it further." Someone had gone in within the last hour, possibly less. Holt drew his revolver. Briggs did the same. Nora had the shotgun already in her hands. She looked at Colt beside her. He had his revolver drawn, held low, his face set hard against whatever his side was costing him now. They went in fast and quiet. The front room had been searched. A chair overturned, the contents of a cabinet spread across the floor. A Bible open on the rug, its pages bent back from the binding. The searching had been thorough, not frantic, the work of someone patient and methodical. Silas Greer, a sound from the back of the house. Wood moving against wood, deliberate and unhurried. Holt went left toward the kitchen. Briggs went right toward the side room. Nora went straight down the hallway without pausing, because pausing in a hallway was simply a slower way of arriving at the same outcome. The back room was a child's bedroom, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a rag doll lying on the pillow, a small painted chest of drawers with animals stenciled along the top edge in careful lines. On top of the chest, against the wall, a sewing table that had been pulled forward from its usual position. The sewing table's lid was open. Its contents were scattered across the floor. Thread and cloth scraps and small useful things lying where they had been tipped out by someone looking for something specific beneath them. Silas Greer stood with his back to the door, turning a small cedar box in his hands. He was examining the underside of it with the focused patience of a man who has almost found what he is looking for and can feel how close he is. "Put it down," Nora said. Greer turned. He was not startled. A man like Greer did not startle. He received new information and incorporated it into whatever he was already calculating. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at Nora. He looked briefly and specifically at the doorway behind her. "Mrs. Harden," he said, "you're more persistent than I gave you credit for." "Put the box down," she said. He looked at the box in his hands, at her. His dark, muddy eyes ran their arithmetic with the same patience they always showed. "You know what's in it," he said. "I know what opens it," she said. Something shifted in his expression. A fractional recalculation. "The key," he said. "Put the box on the floor and step away from it. You won't shoot me, Mrs. Harden. You don't know what I'll do. I know you're not a woman who trades one problem for a worse one when there's another option." He was still holding the box. His eyes were still measuring. Then he did something she had not expected. He looked directly at Nora and said, in the same quiet, dry voice he used for everything, "You came a very long way for a box of ribbons." "I came a long way for what's under them," Nora said. Holt appeared in the doorway beside her. "He's right that you won't shoot him," Holt said with a pleasantness that had nothing warm underneath it. "Because I'm going to arrest him instead, and he's going to put that box on the floor right now, or I'm going to be considerably less pleasant about asking." Greer looked at the badge, at the revolver, at Nora. He ran his calculation to its end and found that the end did not offer him any angle he had not already considered and discarded. He set the box on the floor, slowly, with one hand still resting on the lid for a moment after it touched the ground, as though releasing it required a decision he made precisely rather than quickly. Holt crossed the room and put Greer against the wall with the brisk thoroughness of a man who has done this many times and has no patience for the moments when people make it theatrical. Briggs appeared at the window from outside, having gone around the back of the house and covered the rear. Nora picked up the cedar box. It was small, 10 inches long and perhaps 6 wide, made of cedar that had dried to a deep reddish brown. A flower had been carved into the lid in simple lines, the work of a man with a knife and wood and a daughter who liked flowers. The lid was open. Inside lay ribbons, red and yellow and green, each one folded carefully. The accumulated small treasures of a child's specific care for the things she considered hers. Greer had examined the inside of the lid and the apparent bottom of the box. He had found nothing because he had been looking at it the way an adult examines a child's possession, as a container, not as the thing itself. Nora turned the box over. Set flush with the wood at the bottom, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it, was a small brass keyhole, the kind of fitting a careful craftsman adds when he wants something hidden to stay hidden from anyone not specifically searching for it. She reached into her coat and took out the key. Colt appeared in the doorway. He looked at her hands. At the box, at the key. He said nothing. The key went into the lock with the small, precise click of something finding what it was made for. Nora turned it. The bottom panel of the box lifted free on a hidden hinge, precisely fitted, nearly seamless. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth tied with brown cord, was a flat, dense package. Nora carried it to the sewing table and set it down. She untied the cord and opened the oilcloth. A ledger, thin and cloth-bound, its pages filled with small, careful handwriting, 3 folded documents beside it, each bearing signatures at the bottom. And beneath those, a sealed envelope, on the front of which 2 words had been written in the same hand she had seen on the wanted notice. The same slight rightward lean, the same deliberate, careful pressure. Marshall Holt. The room went very quiet. Nora picked up the envelope and held it out. Holt crossed the room and took it. He looked at his name on the front. He looked at Greer against the wall with Briggs behind him. He looked at Colt in the doorway. Then he opened the envelope and read. He read it standing. He did not move to sit down. He did not make any of the small adjustments people make when they are settling in for something. He read the way you read a letter from someone who knew they were going when they wrote it, standing still, because stillness in that moment was its own form of respect. When he finished, he folded it carefully and placed it inside his coat. He was quiet for a long moment. "Sam Cross," he said. He said it to no one in particular, or perhaps to someone who was not in the room. He turned to Colt. "The letter confirms everything in the ledger," he said. "It confirms Cross's account of Rain's operation in full. It names Denton Greer and 4 others." He paused. "It also confirms that Samuel Cross sought your help willingly, that you worked to move the evidence, that you drew off Rains's men to give him time." Another pause. "And it says that if this letter is being read, it means Samuel Cross did not make it back, and that the man who carried this key to Hayes City was the last honest act he was able to make." Colt did not move. His face had gone to the stripped-down stillness that Nora had learned to read as the presence of something too large to show all at once. "The warrant for Jack Voss," Holt said. "That name is a fabrication of Dutch Rains. I'll have it withdrawn before the day is out." He looked at Colt steadily. "Colt Warden has other matters to answer for. The years before this. Those don't disappear." "I know," Colt said. "But murder is not among them," Holt said. "Sam Cross did not die by your hand. This letter says so. The ledger supports it. And I knew Samuel Cross for 11 years, and I know when I am reading his truth." Nora pressed her hands flat against the surface of the sewing table, feeling the grain of the wood under her palms. The solidity of a thing that has held something important for long enough. Greer said from against the wall, in the same quiet voice he used for everything, "Rains will know about this before nightfall." "Rains will be in federal custody before nightfall," Holt said. "The ledger gives me everything I need. He's been in Ellsworth for the past week. I have a deputy there who has been waiting for my word." He looked at Briggs. "Send the wire now." Briggs went. Holt took Greer by the arm with the efficient authority of a man who has run out of patience for anything that delays what needs to happen next. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering, for conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, and for several other matters I'll enumerate once I've had time to sit down with the ledger." He moved toward the door. "Come on." Greer went. He went the way he did everything, without visible emotion, still somewhere behind his eyes running calculations, still looking for an angle he might have missed. Nora watched him go and thought he would be looking for that angle for a considerable time without finding it. The room emptied. Nora stood alone in Samuel Cross's daughter's bedroom with the cedar box and the scattered ribbons on the floor and the rag doll on the bed watching her with button eyes. She bent and picked up the ribbons one by one and folded each one the way a child folds things, not perfectly, but with care. Red, yellow, green. She put them back in the top of the box and closed the lid. She was still standing there when she became aware that Colt was in the doorway behind her. "He's taking Greer to the jail," Colt said. "He wants us to stay in town until the wire goes through and the warrant withdrawal is confirmed." Nora put the last ribbon in the box and closed the lid. She turned to look at him. He looked worse than he had all morning. The effort of the last hour had cost him what reserves he had left. His face was pale beneath its weathering, and the pain had stopped being something he was managing and had become something he was simply enduring. But his eyes were the clearest she had seen them since the gate. "Clara Cross," Nora said. "Holt said he moved her and her mother somewhere safe. Do you know if they're still in town?" "I'll ask him," Colt said. Clara was staying 2 streets over, with a woman named Garfield, the kind of practical arrangement a town makes for people who need shelter from something larger than weather. Holt told them where when he came back from the jail, and Nora went there alone while Colt sat in Holt's office with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, finally allowing himself the small mercy of being still. Clara Cross was exactly 6 years old. Small for it, with her father's dark hair cut straight across her forehead and a gap in her front teeth that gave her speech a soft and slightly whistling quality that Nora found immediately and unexpectedly disarming. She wore a blue dress and held a rag rabbit nearly identical to the doll on the bed in her father's house, which made Nora think that Samuel Cross had known his daughter well enough to ensure she had a spare of the things she loved most. Clara looked at Nora with the particular directness of a child who has been frightened and has decided the most useful response to fear is to look at everything very carefully. "Are you the lady who got the key?" she asked. Nora crouched down to her level. "I helped carry it," she said. "The man who kept it safe for your father is the one who deserves the credit." Clara looked at the cedar box Nora had brought. Her face was complicated in the way children's faces are complicated, when they are holding something large without the learned ability to simplify it for an audience. "Did it do what Papa hid it for?" she asked. "Yes," Nora said. "It did exactly what he hoped it would do." Clara put her small hand on the lid of the box and left it there for a moment, as though the box needed to know she still claimed it. "Mama said Papa was very brave," she said. "Your mama is right," Nora said. Clara looked at her steadily. "Was the man who kept the key brave too?" Nora thought about Colt Warden sitting against the wall in a federal marshal's office with his eyes closed and his side torn up from 2 days of hard riding and his face carrying the complicated record of a life that had gone badly wrong for a long time and was only now slowly trying to go right. He was, Nora said. He made mistakes before he was brave, but when it mattered most, he was. Clara considered this the way children consider things that have been explained to them with honesty rather than simplification. Then she reached into the pocket of her blue dress and produced a ribbon, red, bright, and unfaded, clearly new. Mama got me a new one, she said. Because my old red one was on the porch. She held it out to Nora. The man can have this one. Papa would have wanted him to have something for keeping it all that time. Nora took the ribbon with both hands. She stayed with Clara and her mother for another hour, drinking tea and answering their questions with the honesty that people who have been through loss together deserve. When she left, Clara's mother held her hand at the door and did not say thank you. Nora understood that. Thank you was not the right word, and this woman knew it. The warrant for Jack Voss was formally withdrawn before noon. The wire to Ellsworth was sent at 11:47. The reply came back at 1 in the afternoon. Dutch Raines taken into federal custody at the Drovers Hotel without significant incident, which Nora privately thought was probably not entirely accurate but was willing to accept as the official version. Cal Denton and his 2 remaining riders were picked up on the road east of Hayes City in the afternoon. They had ridden hard toward town when they lost contact with Greer, apparently deciding that consolidation was preferable to scattering. They consolidated directly into the path of 2 of Holt's deputies who had been riding out to meet them. The thick one gave up immediately. The young one tried to run, and his horse stumbled in a roadside ditch, and he sat in the ditch for 20 minutes until the deputy came back for him. Nora heard all of this from a chair by the window in Holt's office, watching Hayes City go about its ordinary December business while Colt slept in the back room on the cot Holt kept for overflow from the jail. She could hear his breathing from where she sat, slow and even. She found after a while that she was listening to it without having decided to. Holt came back in the late afternoon and sat across the desk from her. Colt Warden will need to appear before Judge Aldrich, he said. Not for Cross's death, that's settled, but for the years before it. The ledger accounts for enough of the operation that the full accounting of who did what is unavoidable. I understand, Nora said. His cooperation, his testimony, the months he spent protecting the evidence, all of that will be taken into account. He used the phrase with the precision of a man who knew exactly what it meant and exactly what it did not promise. He'll face consequences, Nora said. Yes, that's right, she said. That doesn't make it wrong. Holt looked at her for a moment. You're a practical woman, Mrs. Hardin. I'm a Kansas woman, she said. It's the same thing. When Colt came out of the back room, Nora was still at the window. He moved more carefully than he had all day, which she had learned meant he was actually in more pain. Because when people start moving carefully around you, it means they are no longer spending anything on appearances. He sat in the chair across from her and she handed him the red ribbon without preamble or explanation. He took it and looked at it. Clara, Nora said. She said your father would have wanted you to have something for keeping it. She paused. She meant Cross. She said your father. Colt looked at the ribbon for a long time. Nora left the silence alone. That quality of silence was not meant to be filled. She should hate me, he said finally. She asked if you were brave. He looked up. I told her you made mistakes before you were brave, Nora said, but that when it mattered, you were. She held his gaze. She accepted that. Children understand more than we assume about the difference between who a person was and who a person is working to become. Colt closed his hand around the ribbon. His jaw moved once. Then he looked at the window, at the flat December light lying across the rooftops of Hayes City, at the ordinary business of a town that did not know what had happened inside it today, and his face held the expression of a man who has put down a weight he has been carrying for so long that the absence of it changes how everything around him feels. Holt appeared in the doorway with his coat on and his hat in his hand. Judge Aldrich comes in from Salina at the end of the week, he said. I'll need your testimony before then, Warden. All of it. You'll have it, Colt said. Holt looked at him for a moment with something that was not quite the expression of a lawman, or not only that. Sam Cross trusted you, he said. He was the best judge of men I have ever known. I'm choosing to take that seriously. He put his hat on. Don't make me regret it. He went out. Nora left Hayes City the following morning, December the 19th, with 2 days of riding back to the Hardin Ranch ahead of her. Colt walked with her to where her mare was tethered at the livery. He moved slowly. She saddled her own horse and did not offer to help him with anything because offering would have been wrong. He understood that without being told. At the livery door, she stopped. Holt will manage the legal arrangements, she said. He's a man who does what he says he'll do. I know, Colt said. It will take time. I know that too. She looked at him. At the gray eyes and the careful face and the red ribbon she could see at the edge of his coat pocket where he had put it. At the man who had come to her gate with a false name and blood on his shirt and had sat in her kitchen and told her the truth in pieces, each piece costing something, until there were no pieces left that he was holding back. Write to me, she said, when things are settled enough to write. He looked at her steadily. What would I write? The truth, she said. You're reasonably good at it when you commit to it. Something moved in his expression, close enough to a smile to matter. Nora, don't say anything else right now, she said. Nothing you might want to say is better said before you've done what you need to do. He looked at her a moment longer, and then he nodded in the way he nodded when something was settled between them. She mounted and rode south out of Hays City into the enormous pale winter sky, the plains opening in every direction into the particular honest endlessness of Kansas in December. She did not look back. She had said she would not look back until she meant to return, and she meant it now as she had meant it then. She reached the ranch on the evening of the 21st. The house was cold from 2 days empty, and the lamp needed filling, and the water in the indoor pail had a skin of ice around its edges. She built the fire first, then tended to the horses the neighbor's boy had been looking after. Then, in the last gray light of the afternoon, she walked to the oak tree and stood at Walter's marker with her hat in her hands. "It's done," she said quietly. Or the beginning of done, which is how most things that matter actually start. She looked at the marker, at the frost still caught on the north-facing letters. "I think you would have liked him. Not right away. You were careful about people, the same way I am. But eventually, the wind moved the bare branches above her. The last light went orange at the horizon and faded. She went inside. She hung her coat. She set the kettle on the stove, and then, without thinking about it, without deciding to, she went to the cabinet and took out 2 cups and put them both on the table. She looked at them for a long moment, then she left them both wherever they were and sat down to wait for the water to boil. The first letter arrived in January on a Thursday, carried by the regular post rider along with her seed catalog and a county notice about road maintenance. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting that leaned slightly to the right. Inside a single page, dense with information and spare with everything else. The kind of letter a man writes when he has decided to say only what is true and has found, possibly to his own surprise, that the true things take up considerable space. He wrote about the testimony. About Judge Aldrich, who turned out to be the same Judge Cross had been trying to reach. A man of 70 who wore reading glasses on a chain and asked questions with the patience of someone who had spent 40 years listening to people attempt deception and had become very accurate at recognizing when they were not. He wrote about Holt, about the arrangements, about the things that were settled and the things that would take more time. At the end of the page, one sentence that had nothing to do with legal matters. "The red ribbon is in my coat pocket. It has been since Hays City. I thought you should know." Nora read the letter at the kitchen table with both cups in front of her. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and went to Walter's desk and opened the top drawer and placed it beside the bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. The letters Walter had carried in his coat because they were the thing he wanted closest to him when it mattered most. She left the drawer open for a moment, looking at the 2 kinds of letters together. Then she closed it gently and went back to her morning. She wrote back on Sunday. 2 pages. She wrote about the ranch, the fences, the cattle, the way the winter had come down hard and the horses were eating more hay than she had planned for. She wrote about the oak tree and the way the frost had finally gone deep enough to stop the ground from shifting. She wrote, near the end, about the morning she had poured 2 cups of coffee and left both on the table without thinking about it. She did not explain what she meant. She thought he would understand without explanation. She had found in the time she had known him that he generally understood what she meant, and she saw no reason that should change across the distance of letters. She was right. He came in March. The ground was still cold, but the snow was gone, and the grass was beginning its slow, determined return. The sky had changed from the tin plate gray of December to something higher and more open. The oak tree at the back of the house showed the first small suggestion of buds on its branches. She saw him coming up the road in the early afternoon, a man on a sound horse, not the black gelding, moving at an easy, unhurried pace. He stopped at the gate and took his hat off and held it in front of him with both hands, and he stood there without coming through, and she understood why without needing to think about it. She came down off the porch and across the yard and stopped on her side of the gate. They looked at each other. He looked better, not unmarked, not as though the months between December and March had simply removed what had come before, but rested, more solid in himself. The gray eyes clear and present in a way they had been clouded against during those days in December. "I have roughly 8 months of supervised work ahead of me," he said. Holt arranged fencing contracts and county work. The judge was specific about the terms. He paused. "They're fair, I know," she said. "I'm not a free man yet. Not entirely. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "Nora." "Colt," she said. "I have no particular right to be standing at your gate." "No," she said, "you don't." He waited. She reached out and lifted the latch and pushed the gate open. "But you can come in for coffee," she said. He looked at the open gate, then at her. Something moved through his expression, passing through several things in quick succession, relief and gratitude, and something quieter and slower than both, something that had taken longer to arrive and would take longer still to fully name. He stepped through. They walked across the yard together in the pale March afternoon. The oak tree stood at the edge of her vision with its first green beginning. Walter Hardin's marker was white in the sunlight, and the house that he had built board by board stood solid and plain against the Kansas sky. She went inside first. She went to the stove. She heard him come through the door behind her, his boots on her kitchen floor, familiar in a way she had not expected, as though the months between his last footstep there and this one had been not absence but a long pause before the next part of something. She put the kettle on. She went to the cabinet. She took out 2 cups and set them on the table. Both of them, without hesitation, without putting either one away. The ribbon Clara Cross had sent was tied to the window frame, where Nora had put it the day she came home from Hayes City. Bright red against the December gray, it had not faded in the months since. It was still there now in the March light, catching the afternoon sun that came through the west-facing window at this hour, and turned it the color of something new. Outside, the prairie ran to the horizon in every direction, too large for any single person to take in all at once, which had always been true and had never been the point. The point was that it was there, open and honest and patient, and that on a given afternoon in March, with coffee heating on the stove and the ground beginning to wake from its long cold sleep, and a man who had learned to tell the truth sitting down at her kitchen table, Nora Hardin looked out her window at the Kansas plain and did not feel made small by its size. She felt for the first time in a long time exactly equal to it.